Well, thank you. It's a great opportunity to follow on from what was said before, because what I'm going to talk about today is using measurement in order to guide how we try and develop these policy changes, but also how we show people the impact of what it is that they're doing. There's an old saying from business which is, you can't manage what you don't measure. And the counterpoint to that is the things that you measure tend to become the things that you consider to be important. And in the 5 minutes that I've got, I'm going to talk briefly about the existing measurement that we have and the capability we have in 21st century living to be able to capture a lot of the ways that we live so that we can determine when we've made real and valuable change, how we can address climate change with some of these new modes of measurement, why I'm not going to tell you to convert everybody into robots and run around and change everything overnight, because whenever we think about technology, we have to think about the human factors involved. And from the talk just before me, the human factors are incredibly important. If we try and force things down onto people, there's going to be an awful lot of resistance. And finally, and very close to my heart, I'm going to be talking about data ethics and privacy. If we're going to be capturing all of this information, even with the best intentions, how is it that we're actually going to make sure that we don't come up with something that is worse than the situation we find ourselves in? Right now, the city, anywhere that we live, we say city, but we mean anywhere that human beings live, there are vast amounts of information, where cars are going, what traffic flows are like, which level crossings are down, who's using what kind of vehicle. And the way that we've designed our habitation is generally in response to that. Cities that have lived a long time, cities that have developed, places where people have lived for a long time have things in common. And we adapt those. We adapt to changes, we measure what's going on. Sometimes we do sensible things like redesigning traffic flows in high-density situations. Sometimes we just build more roads, but we always respond to changes in the environment. And one of the things that we've been looking at is how we can take this sensed data, which we can now sense very easily, remotely, continuously, and combine all of the various data feeds so that we have a solution that works at the system level. There's a classic example from London of the M25, the giant road that rings London, and they had these traffic jams caused by people braking because they were going too fast and they'd brake, and all the cars were so close that they would actually start accumulating in these braking patterns that existed for no reason except somebody had braked, and these traffic jams would go back for miles. Their solution was to actually introduce zones that slowed things down occasionally. That's not intuitive. It's a system solution. It reduced a lot of the congestion on what was a horrible road rather than building larger traffic lanes. One of the things that really appeals to me is the idea of transformation through incentive, which is identifying those key aspects of what exactly it is that we're doing now. Where is it that we are actually expending the majority of resources so that we can measure the changes inside that to determine if we're making useful change? From the Internet of Things, where every little device, everything you have can potentially squawk data at you, a temperature sensor in your garden, a foliage sensor above a power line can tell you if a tree needs cutting or something needs moisture, squawking every hour or every minute or whatever. How do we take all of that information and use it to provide answers that are actually going to reduce our consumption, our footprint overall, and allow us to come up with real solutions to address what the rest of the speakers will be talking about in the kind of solutions we're looking for? How do we provide incentive to people? If one of our biggest problems is food waste, and we do waste an enormous amount of food, which means there's a large amount of energy that has effectively been used in its production and transport that is then wasted, if we're looking to reduce that, if somebody wastes less, can we provide them with some sort of reward? If they're dumping less stuff down in for processing, can we do something with that? But when we collect all of this information, the biggest problem we've got is we run the risk of accidentally capturing far too much about you. And that's something that people really don't like. Data has a great deal of value, and this is the biggest challenge that we see in bringing together these large system models that are going to be assisting with this, which is we get all the information we need, but we don't take away your autonomy, and we don't force people into a post-privacy situation, because people need to adapt. We want people to accept and move past resistance, and we want to find a way of doing things now that is actually going to be useful and is going to be a good way to live. People still want to live well, and they still want to do a lot of the things we're doing now, and we're not going to be able to go forward if we don't take that into account. So when we look at this overall technological approach, we're measuring in order to try and make this work.
Extra clap for finishing precisely on time. Nick, you also have chosen 2 questions from our audience tonight. The first one is, what role do electric cars and other transport vehicles play in achieving emissions targets? And what role does the decreasing consumption of animal products play in achieving emissions targets?
Thank you very much. I know that there's going to be a lot more discussion about the role of electrics later on. The electric car itself is a part of the problem. It's a part of the solution, sorry, to the problem. Wow, that's a great thing to say. No, I'm sorry about that. Because if we think about this in terms of systems, we think about what are we doing in terms of transport. We could say, oh, we want everybody to be on bikes, but there's a large percentage of the Australian population for whom that won't work. So when we think about all of these transport solutions, one of the reasons I talk about systems is because integrated transport is a matter of taking into account those people who can walk, those people who can bike, those people who actually need cars, people with toddlers, people who need those sorts of assistance things. We have people in all sorts of phases of their life. That's one of the reasons why the data privacy that we look at is so important, because we actually want to capture the ways that certain groups of people live, because then we can provide them with a service, but we don't want to drill into their lives in detail. So there's a significant role for the transformation of transport, using things like the electric car, but we see this as being something as part of a systems approach based on the data of the city. Now this one I actually alluded to earlier in terms of the decreasing consumption of animal product. There's a lot more that can be said about this, but minimising waste in the first instance is going to decrease the amount of animal product we consume. We also, of course, in Australia have a very strong commitment to animal-based agriculture. And so when we think about this kind of targeting, we have to think about a vast number of human factors. And it's one of the reasons that we consider sustainability, measurement for sustainability, for the establishment of sound supply chains, so that when something comes out of a supermarket, you can say, well, actually, it's still food grade. Because we've got the supply chain all the way through, this is still good food. We don't need to throw it out. We can do something else with it. So the reason I brought this question up is because, and obviously there's a role if we do decrease the consumption of animal products, but if we start by minimising the waste with technology that we have now, we will actually start to achieve a great deal along these lines. Thank you.